In the heart of a quiet Kansas suburb, a deadly fire tore through a picturesque home on a peaceful summer night. By dawn, the once pristine house was reduced to ash, and with it, the life of Margaret Green, a wealthy widow who had recently married the town's beloved pastor, Samuel Cross. His grief-stricken face, streaked with soot, became the image of tragedy. A man of faith, now a man without his wife. The local community rallied around him. Sermons of hope poured from his lips, a voice of calm in a time of chaos. But as the town mourned Margaret's loss, there were whispers, questions that no one dared to ask aloud, questions about Samuel's past, questions about why Margaret, a woman known for her sharp instincts, had confided in a friend just days before her death that she was afraid for her life. And then came the discovery, a single message sent from Samuel's phone the night of the fire. A message that investigators would later call the key to unlocking a web of deceit. This is not a story about faith, nor is it one of redemption. It's a story about what happens when trust is shattered, when a carefully crafted mask begins to slip, and when the truth buried beneath the ashes is darker than anyone could imagine. Everyone is talking about this case, sharing it with their friends. So why don't you? Stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why Samuel Cross's name has become synonymous with betrayal. This is the story of a pastor, a marriage, and a fire that was anything but accidental. Samuel Cross was more than just a pastor. He was a leader, a voice of hope in Hillside, Kansas. At 34, he had built a reputation as a man of unwavering faith and humility, someone who could inspire a room with a single sermon. People trusted him, admired him, even revered him. His story of redemption, from a troubled youth to a pillar of the community, resonated deeply. And then there was Margaret Green. At 52, she was the picture of elegance and success. As the widow of Thomas Green, one of the most powerful names in oil and gas, Margaret carried a fortune and a legacy that few could match. But wealth didn't define her. Her kindness and generosity earned her respect far beyond the boardrooms her late husband once ruled. She funded schools, supported local charities, and even donated large sums to Samuel's church. When the two began their romance, it seemed to many like a blessing. A man of God and a woman of grace. Two people rebuilding their lives after hardship. Their courtship was fast, too fast for some, but the town was captivated by their story. Whispers circulated, of course. Margaret's age and wealth raised questions no one dared to ask. Was it love, or something else? But those doubts faded on the day of their wedding. The ceremony was breathtaking, though understated, as Margaret would have wanted. In a small, restored church hall, she walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, her smile radiant, her hand steady in Samuel's. He, in turn, gazed at her with what seemed like pure devotion. Guests applauded, wiped away tears, and whispered prayers for their happiness. But not everyone smiled that day. If you watched closely, you might have seen a few uneasy glances, a subtle discomfort in the air. Some couldn't shake the feeling that this union wasn't quite what it seemed. 2 months later, Margaret was dead. It happened late one night. The quiet of Hillside shattered as an explosion tore through the Cross home. Flames engulfed the property within minutes, lighting up the dark Kansas sky. Neighbors rushed outside, watching helplessly as the house crumbled. Fire crews battled the blaze for hours, but by morning, the home was gone, reduced to ash. And so was Margaret Green. Samuel survived. Barely, he said. When first responders found him, he was covered in soot, coughing and shaking, claiming he tried to save his wife but couldn't reach her. His tearful account spread quickly, and the community wrapped him in their arms. Prayers poured in, casseroles appeared at his door, and on Sunday, he stood before his congregation with red-rimmed eyes and a trembling voice. "This is God's test for me," he said, "and I will not lose my faith, no matter how heavy this burden feels." The church wept with him. They believed him. Most did, anyway. But a few began to wonder. Why had Samuel escaped when Margaret hadn't? Why had she confided to a friend, just days before the fire, that she no longer felt safe? And why did something about Samuel's grief feel rehearsed? Those questions might have stayed unanswered if not for what investigators found next. In the ashes of the Cross home, they discovered something unexpected. Something that would unravel everything and send them chasing a truth far more shocking than anyone imagined. Stay with us. To the people of Hillside, Kansas, Samuel Cross was the perfect pastor. His sermons on redemption were electric, filled with passion and wisdom far beyond his 34 years. He had a way of connecting with everyone, whether it was the elderly who admired his faith or the younger crowd drawn in by his charm. But Samuel had a secret. Behind the polished exterior and the sermons of salvation, Samuel was hiding a part of his life he couldn't afford to let anyone see. It was a secret he carried carefully, one that, if revealed, could shatter the image he had worked so hard to build. For months, Samuel had been slipping away from Hillside on weekends under the guise of ministry work. In truth, he was driving to a nearby city to meet Daniel, a 27-year-old male artist. Daniel was everything Samuel couldn't be in Hillside: open, free, and unapologetically himself. Their relationship was intense and deeply passionate, but it was also meticulously hidden. Samuel insisted they keep their meetings private, away from the eyes of anyone who might recognize him. He was careful, cautious. He thought he had it all under control. But Samuel underestimated just how fragile his double life was. One text, just a few words, would prove to be his undoing. Back in Hillside, Margaret was starting to notice changes in her husband. Samuel, once so attentive and loving, during courting had grown distant. He spent long weekends away, claiming he was helping rural congregations in need, but something felt off. He was distracted, his phone always locked and close by, and his demeanor had shifted from affectionate to cold. Margaret confided her concerns to Peter Mack, the assistant pastor and someone she deeply trusted. Through tears, she shared what had been weighing on her heart. The nights Samuel didn't come home, the strange phone calls, the way he avoided her questions. Peter listened carefully, offering reassurance and promising to be there for her. Then Margaret found something she couldn't ignore. In Samuel's office, tucked away in a folder, she discovered financial documents, papers that hinted Samuel was planning to inherit her entire estate. There was a draft will with his name listed as the sole beneficiary and notes about investments tied to her wealth. It was clear to Margaret that Samuel's love for her wasn't what it seemed. But that wasn't all. Margaret, sharp and cautious as ever, began recording their arguments. In one recording, Samuel lashed out, deflecting her accusations and refusing to answer her questions. Fearing for her safety, she sent the recording to Peter as insurance, telling him, "If anything happens to me, you'll know the truth." Samuel discovered the communication between Margaret and Peter. Furious, he confronted Peter, warning him to stay silent. He promised he'd fix things, that everything would go back to normal. But Peter couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. And then it did. Before Margaret could take action, the fire consumed her, or so it seemed. Was this truly an accident? Or was it something far more deliberate? Investigators were about to uncover evidence that would change everything. The fire was initially deemed an accident. Firefighters and investigators pointed to a possible gas leak as the cause, and with Samuel's tearful testimony, his alibi seemed airtight. Samuel claimed he had been in bed when the fire started, barely escaping with his life. The community, still in shock, rallied behind him, offering prayers and support. As far as they knew, there was no reason to suspect foul play. But then came the tip. Peter Mack, the now former assistant pastor, came forward with information that would shake everything. He confessed to detectives that Margaret had become suspicious of Samuel in the months leading up to her death. Margaret had confided in him about her growing unease, about Samuel's secret life. Peter had always kept his distance from the troubled aspects of the church's leadership, but after Margaret's death, he couldn't live with the weight of his silence. He handed over a recording he had of one of Margaret's heated confrontations with Samuel. The audio painted a stark picture of the emotional and psychological warfare she had been enduring. Margaret had caught wind of Samuel's secret relationship with Daniel, a young gay artist. As the recording played, the chilling exchange became clear. Margaret, in a shaky voice, "Samuel, I know what's been going on. I found the messages. I know about Daniel. You're living a lie and I'm the one who's paying for it. What are you going to do when this all falls apart?" Samuel, with forced calm, "Margaret, please, you don't understand. It's not what you think. I never wanted any of this. I'm trying to fix things, trying to protect you." "Margaret, protect me? From what? You're playing me for a fool. You've planned everything, Samuel, everything. And now you're planning to take my wealth too." The voice recording ended abruptly, the tension still hanging in the air. It was clear. Samuel was hiding much more than just his sexuality. Margaret had left behind a breadcrumb trail of evidence. Evidence Samuel had no idea existed. The police were not shocked by Peter's revelation. Samuel had already told them about the conflicts between him and Margaret, about their arguments over money and trust. But what truly altered the course of the investigation was the last message Margaret had sent before her death. On the night of the fire, Margaret texted her friend, "I feel unease in this house. Something smells off." That message, sent just hours before the blaze, was a cry for help that Samuel had clearly never anticipated being discovered. But there was more, much more. Investigators uncovered a critical piece of evidence that linked Samuel directly to the fire. A text message Samuel had sent to Daniel on the night of the fire. It was chilling in its simplicity. "It's done. We're free now." The investigators immediately honed in on the text's meaning. They now had a motive. Samuel had planned this all along, and it appeared the fire was part of his plan to sever his ties with Margaret and claim everything. The investigation turned when the police traced Samuel's movements in the days leading up to the fire. GPS data from Samuel's car showed that he had purchased several gas canisters just days before the blaze. This new evidence confirmed what everyone had feared. This wasn't an accident. It was arson. The timeline was now clear. Samuel had meticulously planned the fire, making sure he was nowhere near the house when it erupted into flames. His plan, it seemed, was to walk away unscathed while eliminating Margaret from the equation entirely. Even with this mounting evidence, some in the town still foolishly defended Samuel. To them, he was the pastor who had helped rebuild their community, the man who had inspired them with his words and his faith. They refused to believe that the man they had entrusted with their spiritual well-being could be capable of such an atrocity. As the investigation continued to unfold, the truth became undeniable. But Samuel Cross's carefully constructed mask was still firmly in place. How far would he go to protect his secrets? And would the town ever truly come to terms with the man they had once revered? Stay tuned as we continue. Samuel's supporters stood firm as the trial began. The congregation he had once led with charisma and compassion refused to believe that the man they revered could be guilty of such a heinous crime. They filled the courtroom, their presence a quiet protest against the accusations. Samuel's defense team capitalized on this, portraying him as a victim of circumstance, a grieving husband caught in a tragic accident. They argued that the fire was nothing more than a freak occurrence, possibly caused by faulty gas lines or an electrical issue. To many, their arguments seemed plausible. After all, how could a man of God, a man who had dedicated his life to service, be capable of such a calculated act? But the prosecution had no intention of letting emotions cloud the facts. Piece by piece, they began to dismantle Samuel's alibi, revealing cracks in the narrative he had so carefully constructed. The first blow came with the GPS data from Samuel's car. The records showed that, contrary to his claim of being at home the entire night, Samuel had been driving around just hours before the fire started. Investigators traced his movements to a hardware store where, days before the fire, he had purchased gas canisters. It was clear that Samuel had not only been untruthful but had also gone to great lengths to plan his actions. The next revelation came when forensic analysts testified that traces of gasoline residue were found on Samuel's clothing. His defense team tried to explain it away, suggesting that the residue could have come from earlier, unrelated activities. But the timeline of events left little room for doubt. The gasoline on his clothes was fresh, a damning piece of evidence that tied him directly to the scene of the crime. Then came the testimony of Daniel, Samuel's gay partner, who he had secretly been seeing for years. His presence in court was a shock to the congregation. Many had no idea who he was, but as his connection to Samuel became clear, murmurs rippled through the gallery. According to Daniel, their relationship was intense but hidden, driven by Samuel's insistence on secrecy. He was terrified of anyone finding out, Daniel admitted, his voice breaking. He said it would ruin everything, his career, his reputation. "How can a pastor be gay?" he would say. "He told me he couldn't risk it." But as Daniel continued, the jury and spectators were unprepared for the darker truths that began to emerge. Daniel revealed that Samuel wasn't just a man living a double life. He was a man with a long history of deception. Daniel described a moment early in their relationship when Samuel had let slip a troubling story about his past. Years before coming to Hillside, Samuel had ingratiated himself with an older, wealthy couple who had taken him in when he claimed to be down on his luck. Posing as a man in need of redemption, he became a confidant and even convinced the couple to invest in what he called a ministry project to help struggling communities. But the project was a sham. Samuel had pocketed the money and vanished, leaving the couple financially devastated. This revelation shocked everyone in the courtroom. But the prosecution wasn't done. They had one more card to play, one that would leave no doubt about Samuel's guilt. The courtroom fell silent as the recording of Margaret's voice was played. Her words, trembling but resolute, echoed through the chamber. "I know what you're doing, Samuel. I know about Daniel and I know about the money. You've been planning this all along. I'm not safe in this house anymore." The jury listened intently, their faces grim as the recording painted a chilling portrait of Margaret's final days. She had known she was in danger. She had known Samuel was capable of betrayal. And yet, even she couldn't have predicted how far he would go. A forensic expert followed, testifying that the fire was not an accident but a deliberate act. The evidence was clear. The fire had been started with gasoline, spread strategically to ensure that the house would be completely engulfed. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, designed to leave no survivors, or so Samuel thought. As the trial progressed, the weight of the evidence became unbearable. Samuel, who had remained composed through much of the proceedings, began to unravel. His hands trembled, his gaze darted nervously, and his once confident demeanor gave way to visible cracks. Finally, under the pressure of cross-examination, he broke. Through tears, Samuel still insisted he was not guilty, that he was targeted by the enemy of God, who don't want his success or growth of the kingdom. But the jury was able to see beyond his deceit. As the trial neared its conclusion, the courtroom became a battlefield of emotions. Some of Samuel's supporters still clung to the belief that he had been unfairly targeted, while others began to see him for who he truly was. The jury, however, had no room for doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, and Samuel's guilt was undeniable. But even as the verdict loomed, questions remained. Had Samuel truly acted out of desperation, or had this all been part of a meticulous plan? Was his breakdown on the stand genuine, or was it yet another performance from a man who had spent his entire life wearing masks? The truth of Samuel Cross was as murky as the ashes of the fire he had started. The trial was over, but the scars it left on the community would linger for years to come. The congregation was forced to reckon with the fact that the man they had once idolized was capable of betrayal, manipulation, and murder. And as Samuel was led away in handcuffs, the town of Hillside, Kansas, was left to grapple with a single haunting question. How well do we ever truly know someone? The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered Samuel Cross's sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The man who had once stood at the pulpit preaching redemption and salvation now sat motionless, his head bowed, as the weight of his actions finally came crashing down. Gasps and sobs rippled through the gallery. The impact of Samuel's conviction reached far beyond the courtroom. The church he had built with such fervor, once a thriving community hub, disbanded within weeks. Attendance plummeted, and the building itself became a painful reminder of the lies and deceit that had unfolded within its walls. Donations dried up, and the doors were eventually closed for good. Hillside, Kansas, once proud of its beloved pastor, was left grappling with the shame of his actions. Not everyone gave up, though. Peter Mack, the assistant pastor, stepped forward with a vow to rebuild, not just the physical structure, but the trust and faith of the community. "The actions of one man will not define us," he said in a heartfelt statement. "This church belongs to the people of Hillside, and together, we will heal." As the town tried to move forward, Margaret Green's memory became a rallying point. In the weeks following the trial, stories of her kindness and generosity resurfaced. People spoke of the scholarships she had funded, the local charities she had supported, and the quiet ways she had touched countless lives. Margaret's late husband's oil and gas empire had left a lasting mark on the community, but it was Margaret's heart and spirit that people remembered most. But even as the town began to heal, the story of Samuel Cross lingered like a shadow. His betrayal forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, faith, and the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. How far would someone go to hide their true self? The prosecutor had asked during closing arguments. That question hung in the air long after the trial ended, unanswered but haunting. We put our faith in people, in leaders, in those we believe are good and righteous. But what happens when that faith is misplaced? Margaret's story reminds us of the power of generosity, but Samuel's reminds us of the dangers of unchecked ambition, greed, and deception. And so, we are left to ask ourselves, how can we ever truly know the people we trust? From Samuel Cross's rise as a beloved pastor to his downfall as a manipulative predator, this case has revealed the dark truths that can hide behind even the most trusted faces. It's a story of betrayal, greed, and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition. A chilling reminder that trust, once shattered, leaves scars that linger far beyond the moment. But what about you? If you were in Margaret's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have confronted Samuel sooner? Taken a different path? Let us know your thoughts. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us bring you more gripping stories just like this. Next time, we'll uncover the chilling tale of a family secret so dark it led to a decades-long cover-up. Join us as we peel back the layers of a mystery you won't soon forget. Until then, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the truth is closer than we think.